This episode of iFanboy is brought to you by Flashpoint from DC Comics.
So, it's a Vertigo show, right? It was Vertigo. We're talking Vertigo?
Sort of. I mean,
So you're going to do all the talking?
Well,
we can sit back and just do one of these businesses.
But I heard it matters now.
well, Swamp Thing's back in the DCU officially now as a character.
So it means something now, finally.
well, the story's always...
No, now it means something.
You're the problem.
Man thing?
Hey, welcome to another edition of iFanboy, the comic book discussion show. My name is Ron Richards, and I'm with...
Connor Kilpatrick.
And I'm Josh Flanagan. We're here to talk about Swamp Thing because, as was alluded to...
Some big happenings.
He's back.
Swamp Thing is back. I don't know if he
Well,
was
I
ever
don't
gone.
think he went away.
He did go. He was gone.
Was he
He was
gone?
gone. He was dead.
We didn't talk about it.
Completely. For 20
Don't
years,
talk
just
about
didn't
it.
even... Yeah.
If you've been following the goings-on in the DC universe and read Brightest Day, number 23... you would have seen the return. This is a big spoiler, I guess, but here you go.
It's out there. I think
it's true.
Yeah.
You would have
Spoiler
seen
warning. Just
the
in
return
case.
of Swamp Thing, who has a very varied past and is all sorts of forms and all sorts of different takes on him. We're going to talk about some of it.
Well, yeah, and I think he's most for me as a non-Swamp Thing guy. I mean, just to sit there.
You think they're Swamp Thing guys?
Yes,
you're
absolutely.
a Swamp Thing guy.
Well, I mean, I like it, but it's not like you're an X-Men guy. Like this guy's
No,
like,
they're Swamp Thing
Yeah,
guys.
of course.
They're
There's
absolutely-
every character's got a
Yeah.
guy.
So I'm not a Swamp Thing guy, and what I know of Swamp Thing is that Alan Moore's run was like the definitive one, and it pretty much kicked off Vertigo, and it's not in the DCU until recently.
and it is
Well,
not a
well, it
superhero.
started-
And how I know that is
started
because
in DC.
I've gone to many a DC Nation panel at cons, and someone raises their hand and goes, "Why don't you put Swamp Thing in the superhero comics?" And Dan DiDio says, "We can't." What changed?
Well,
apparently.
well, before we get to
wasn't
that,
ready for that
before,
discussion.
before we get to that part of the show, we should talk about the character itself. I mean,
Yeah.
He
He was around before Alan Moore, right?
yes,
Absolutely.
he's been around since 1971.
Really?
In
That
House
long?
of Secrets, he was his first appearance. Alan Moore didn't come around until the 80s, but we're basically going to talk about the Alan Moore run because that's the run that Josh and I have read.
know the best.
And we're not really Swamp Thing experts. I haven't read beyond these books. I haven't read any Swamp Thing.
I read
So
bits of it here and there. It's one of those books that since in the 90s and in the 2000s at Vertigo, they've tried different versions of it, but it never really caught on, although it had some respectable runs with people who you'd recognize on them. But we're going to talk about the Alan Moore run is the one that really defines the Swamp Thing that you're going to see now.
it's the one they're building off
Yes.
of in the DCU. But the important thing to note is that I think we were too young.
Yeah, that's definitely.
This was the early mid 80s.
Early 80s, yeah.
And we were less than 10 years
So
old.
if you're
so
a 65-year-old guy
Yeah.
out there who's like, I was reading it in 71, why couldn't you? That's why.
we were little kids, so I didn't. I knew of Swamp Thing. Certainly, he was around. I just didn't read it because he was scary.
And at the same time that these books were coming out, these issues were coming out. There was a couple of movies. There was a TV series.
I remember the movie.
There's
The movie
animated
came out like in
stuff.
'82, right? Yeah.
It was actually really good costuming on that.
Yeah.
It was really good.
So maybe we're on the verge of a Swamp Thing renaissance, and then
Maybe a resurgence.
The summer of 2013, Swamp Thing 3.
That's pretty soon.
That's the next summer. They have to in
Yeah,
pre-production.
it takes a while to.
Yeah.
Before we get into it, can we talk about the fact that this is a...
Yeah, I noticed that. Yeah, so recently DC's been re-releasing the Alan Moore Swamp Thing run, and
these very nice collections.
very nice collection, beautiful. And this is where we get to the we're crazy people because Volume 1 had a matte finish, kind of rough paper kind of cover, and Volume 2, 3, and 4 had more glossy cover. And this is why I can't read it.
When the second one came... When the second one came in the mail, I went, "Oh, come on!"
But anyway, so it started in House of Secrets. Who created them?
Len Wein and Bernie Wrightson. This was a horror comic.
Yep.
And that's an all-star.
Bernie Wrightson.
Yeah, Bernie Wrightson.
Len Wein,
Yes.
yeah.
When Bernie Wrightson creates a character, A, it's probably a horror character, and B,
It's probably awesome.
probably looks pretty good. And I think that we've seen that it's a design that it's timeless because there's no silly costumes.
He's
that they
just
have to worry
moss.
about.
She's the green.
Yeah, and we saw that change a lot throughout Alan Moore's run, which is one of the things we're going to talk about. And he came, and there was a second volume that started, and it went for 19 issues before Alan Moore showed up. He took one issue, issue 20, to wrap up loose ends. The story was called Loose Ends. And then from 21 on, he started his saga where he redefined what Swamp Thing was. Previously, Alec Holland was a scientist. There was an explosion. He went into the swamp. He emerged as the Swamp Thing.
It's a classic horror
Classic
trope.
mutated, yeah.
Comes out of the water. Rah.
Scientist mutated.
Not looking for brains, but looking for action.
What Alan Moore did was he changed it around a little bit. You find out that the Swamp Thing isn't actually Alec Holland. Again, this is, I suppose, a little bit of a spoiler, but the way that it works is the Swamp Thing is not actually Alec Holland. This is a repeating series of things that has happened over the years with people with names similar to Alec Holland who were involved in fires, and that consciousness was absorbed by the entity of the Swamp Thing, who it turns out is the Swamp Elemental.
And what he did was he introduced a lot of metaphysical aspects to it, a lot of environmental aspects to it. He's the Swamp Thing becomes the protector of the planet. He's the Earth's greatest champion. So when he shows up again in Brightest, it makes a lot of sense because he was Alan Moore made him over the course of these issues. I mean, we haven't read the final volume, so we don't know how it ends. But he made him into the champion of the Earth, so that he protected Earth against not just he didn't fight supervillains. He fought anyone who was harming the Earth.
I mean, from what I've heard, this is like Alan Moore's environmentalist run.
It's kind of like Grant Morrison's Animal Man in that sense.
It's not actually as pointed as the Animal Man run.
No, not at all.
Because it does other things. Like it tackles a lot of social stuff in there. There's a storyline about shooting a film set about during slavery on a plantation, and there's all these racial issues
and the ghosts show up.
But this seems to be very political, at least in some.
There's an issue about a gun manufacturer, and the house is haunted by the souls of everyone who was killed by a gun of that brand.
Yeah,
and there was there was this whole thing where they had to keep building and hammering, so they built this giant house. Like, it's all this imagination and stuff that's going on. Then at the same time, there's a nuclear waste issue, and then the mutants from that. There's flooding a town full of vampires. There's a ton of stuff.
And then in the middle of it, there's Crisis on Infinite Earths.
That's true.
Does the sky go red?
Well, and it's funny because all the talk about Swamp Thing coming back to the DCU, he started the DCU. Mm-hmm. He was a DCU character before there was a Vertigo. So the first half of this run, he's in the DCU.
Right.
Batman shows up.
There's a wonderful
the great scene with Batman.
Do I know you? No. Okay.
During the middle of Crisis,
literally just runs away.
In the middle of Crisis, he runs up to, was it Constantine?
Yeah, Constantine.
And he goes, you guys should stay inside. See, the sky's red. And he, runs away.
Constantine and Batman know each other somehow. There's no... John Constantine, Hellblazer, another long-running Vertigo series, makes his debut in these issues as well. And when he shows up, he's literally fully formed. They're referring to stuff that they've been playing off of since then. Everybody knows him. He hangs out with Zatanna and Zatara and a bunch of those.
Didn't he date Zatanna? Didn't he?
Oh yeah,
yeah. And Zatara dies in this.
Yeah.
So in the DCU, the grief that Zatanna has is based off what happened in this book, which is now kind of a Vertigo book. It's very kind of confusing.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's important to say that this happened pre-Vertigo. I mean, Vertigo got birthed, kind of in the late '80s, early '90s, and partially from the Swamp Thing run, when Neil Gaiman was doing Sandman and Constantine, Hellblazer, that all kind of catapulted Vertigo.
But interestingly, they're all branded Vertigo.
Yeah, of course.
Right. Well, Karen Berger was the editor of these books.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she was the one who founded and launched the Vertigo line. So what happened was a lot of stuff that she had worked on prior to their officially being a Vertigo in '93, I think, when it got backlisted and re-put out again, they branded it Vertigo.
It's like Animal Man.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, that's why the people get up in arms about the labels are so silly, because it says Vertigo, but this is a DCU book and Batman's in it, and the Crisis is in it.
I wonder officially if these are still in continuity. I guess they would be now that...
Yeah.
What's happened to you lately?
Look at that, I know.
I'm wondering from a strategic standpoint, like how the company sort of looks at them.
Well, there's a break. Once Crisis happens, I think it goes into... Even though it's still the DCU, I think it goes into...
That's true.
Into Vertigo territory.
Well, and it's not like a lot of the DC writers haven't been influenced by what Alan Moore has done.
Well,
Blackest Night.
So then, one of the big things that...
staying in that, I think for me, one of the most fun stories in here was the Crisis stuff. I don't know when.
It was actually really good.
And I like when John and Swamp Thing go to the satellite. You know that scene in the Crisis where they're all in the satellite?
Yeah.
And he's like, we can't really do anything, but it's kind of fun to hang out in the room. So they kind of wandering through the room with all the superheroes.
Cool. Really, a lot of times when you read, if you're reading a story like this that's sort of long, there's one...
It's the interludes that are fun.
No, but there'll be a crossover with something that was happening at the time in DC, and you're like, this is terrible. It slowed everything down. It happened in Starman. I forget what the event was. But in this, though, it's kind of odd and fun and definitely weird. The other thing going on here the whole time is that Abby Cable, she's the white-haired love interest the whole time. That as he starts off more human he ends up being, they're very close, and then as he gets, that's like the thread that goes through the whole thing, that the more that he gets connected to the green, which is the underlying plant essence
it's
of
the
the
essence
planet,
of the earth, basically, the plant life. It's the trees.
the more distant he gets from her, and that's sort of the thread that goes through the
The
whole
less
thing.
human he becomes. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's all sorts of weird stuff in there. Like at one point, he grows tubers.
Yeah, the
tubers.
Yeah.
He can grow. You want to eat 'em?
Yeah, and it's like and you could drink it or something.
You eat it. Yeah. There's another story in there where you get like hallucinations and feeling, but it depends very heavily on whether you're a good person or a bad person, whether it's going to be a good trip or a bad trip.
Right.
And that's
how
very
Alan Moore.
That's how they.
The thing to remember is this is a very famous, and the problem with famous runs is they get built up, especially in comics culture. People who read Watchmen for the first time go, this isn't that good. I mean, because the hype is too big, which is why Miracle Man will never be any good if it actually comes out again.
And also, comics age sometimes not as well because of the way that they were done.
It depends on your point of view, but
right.
For me, this was every bit as good as I heard it was. The first one was okay.
Yeah.
For me, I don't keep in later for you. For me, the second volume on, I started really getting into it. I blew through this 2 through 4 really fast.
Let's take a break, and we come back and hear what Josh has to say about it.
This episode is brought to you by DC Comics. Flashpoint. It's not a dream. The entire world lies in ruins. Earth is on the brink of a cataclysmic war. Only one person knows that this isn't how things are supposed to be. Barry Allen, The Flash. Where are Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, and the rest of the Justice League? Can the fastest man alive find the villain who altered the timeline? Will the Flash be able to set things right? Find out in Flashpoint by Jeff Johns and Andy Kubert, this summer's biggest comic book event from DC Comics, featuring radically different versions of the world's greatest superheroes and villains. This is the perfect place to jump on and start reading. Get all of the Flashpoint issues from DC Comics at your local comic shop.
The topic of comics aging well or not well or whatever, and you mentioned Miracle Man, because flipping through this and seeing, like, this is mainly Alan Moore and Stephen Bissette and John Totelben on the entire run.
Yeah.
Right?
Vietch is in there a little. There's a few.
But mostly,
it definitely it looks like Miracle Man. It looks like an 80s comic, and while you talk about whether it ages well or not, flipping through it, I'm like, oh, I like this. Like the
art is fantastic all the way through. Even when
Bissette is great.
Even besides Bissette and Totelben, like the other guys that they brought in were really good too. And so that was a pleasant part.
It has a very distinctive look and feel of that 80s type. And it's a horror book. I mean, there are superheroes, but it's a straight-up horror book.
I was looking at the cover treatments in here, and it's a sophisticated suspense.
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of, like it's a little better than straight-up horror. But.
Yeah, no, it's
straight-up horror, but then you end up, there's a big fight with evil, literally. The concept of evil. And in that fight is, the Phantom Stranger is there, and Etrigan, and Deadman.
It gets very mystical, DC Universe mystical,
Which is not unusual. It's all the stuff where they do, like, Shadow Pact and those kind of characters now. It feels a little like that, but on a bigger scale, and it's just, you have this idea that Swamp Thing is this force of nature, because he is, but the scope of that gets bigger and bigger as you keep going and as the character himself realizes it. And then Constantine comes along, and he's the guy who knows everything. He just won't quite tell him. And it's really fun to play that out through the whole thing.
So now you're a big Constantine fan, Hellblazer fan.
Yeah.
You're the Vertigo guy. After reading all this, does this live up to the hype, or?
Oh yeah, I love the basis that it established.
Yep.
And right away, you see Constantine referring to what happened back in Newcastle, and that has literally been a theme for the last 20+ years in that book. And he had it right there.
It really
right
is.
Away,
it really is all Alan Moore's doing. Yeah. So the entire modern comic industry is all based on Alan Moore's back.
Well, and that's interesting because it ties into what happened recently.
Yes.
So Blackest Night was the big Green Lantern event, the big the multicolored rings,
the DC event from last year,
based off a short story by Alan Moore.
Exactly what I was just about to say. Yeah, basically it was all Jeff Johns pulled that from a short story that Alan Moore did in Green Lantern back in the '80s, and so now after this whole past year, we've been in the Brightest Day world, which is the post Blackest Night, and Brightest Day has been leading up to this moment at the end where all these resurrected heroes are playing a role in the White Lantern, and it comes to the showdown in the forest in Star City, and it reveals that Swamp Thing has returned.
Well, these heroes returned, and the White Lantern said you've returned to fight the Dark Avatar, which is basically all the dark feelings and bad stuff of the Earth,
like Ghostbusters too,
brought to physical form.
Why am I doing things with goo?
So they've been waiting, and we've been waiting to find out who this Dark Avatar is and who the champion would be. We'd all assumed it would be somebody who came back.
Yep.
And so then in issue 23, the big reveal was the Dark Avatar was this Black Lantern Swamp Thing.
Yep.
And then the champion was Alec Holland. He comes crawling out of the ground at the end. And then in the final issue of Brightest Day, Swamp Thing is resurrected. They merge Alec, Holland, and Swamp Thing.
Yep.
And he defeats the Dark Avatar and
spreads the green back through the planet and
restores the green,
Yep.
and then kills a bunch of oil companies.
The Parliament of Trees is in here as well.
The Star City park that came up at the end of Blackest Night was the new Parliament of Trees. It was moved from Brazil to Star City. And
that's
then,
convenient. It's easier to
It
travel.
is nice. You get to take a bus.
Yeah.
And so then he shows up in a boardroom and kills a bunch of the oil executives.
Yeah, so going back to the political thing, and then Brightest Day 24 ends with the return of Constantine in the DCU. So you've got Swamp Thing and John Constantine created in the DCU, moved out into Vertigo, and now they're back into the modern DCU. So as the Vertigo guy, did you just lose your shit?
I didn't read it.
When you heard about it.
No, well, the thing is, I was reading Swamp Thing.
Because it just undoes 20 years of stories.
No, it doesn't.
All that stories you read, they don't matter.
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
Take those comics and burn them.
A, it's Constantine. B,
we decided this was Constantine.
Since I was reading Swamp Thing at the time, I was like, makes perfect sense. It was all there already, so it's not jarring. It was like, all right. Fair play.
They've made a point of saying that
play to you, mate.
they're not stopping the Constantine Hellblazer book, and that book he's old, right? He's in his 60s,
no,
50s, late 50s.
He had his 40th birthday party at one point. He's definitely.
I think he's in his
past
50s.
that. I think they've got him sort of in that nebulous 40.
But
to
he
50s
ages in that
area.
book, whereas this Constantine is a young guy.
Yeah.
They basically say there's two versions. There's a Vertigo version and a DC version, and the DC version is still the young Constantine from the
It's like
Hellblazer.
Punisher Max.
Basically, yes.
Where you kind of like, how old is he? He's old.
So this is the young guy from this, basically, who showed up in this book, whereas your character's been the one that's been aging.
So now, is the prospect of Swamp Thing and Constantine being back in the DCU as a DC guy exciting for you?
I like it because I've been reading these books as this was happening. So if I hadn't been reading these books, I might have been as interested. But they're good characters.
They are.
I mean, as evidenced by we go to a lot of cons and people ask for these characters to come back for a reason.
Yeah.
So to a certain degree, they're kind of giving what people they're giving. Their DC's giving the fans what they want to a certain degree.
You know what I like is that it opens the way for neither of them are superheroes.
Yeah, a different kind of
different kind of story. And if the DC universe can have superheroes and then characters who are not superheroes, right, but they all exist in that world, that's really interesting to me, and it opens up the possibility of the kinds of stories we can read, the kind of things that people can write.
Yep. It's a richer world when you can have a horror section of the DCU.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not people will buy them and read them is another question, but...
Sophisticated suspense.
Right, I'm sorry.
I really
Sophisticated
like that as a
suspense.
tagline, by the way. That's really cool. So I might give it a try. I might give it a read. I do. The first volume is in my to-read pile, so...
You will like the art, for sure.
Yeah, I definitely like that. So cool. So Swamp Thing's back in the DCU, major happenings.
We got 4 volumes here of the Saga of the Swamp Thing, which is Alan Moore's run. The 5th one comes out later this year. It's out soon.
It's I mean, one of Alan Moore's early works. Like if you're enjoyed Watchmen, enjoyed the ABC stuff, you want to go check out Swamp Thing just to be part of the oeuvre.
It's one of those foundations of how modern comics are, really.
Yeah.
And again, it's important to read because of that.
And I was always a little intimidated by it to get into it, but
I've read it a couple times. I read it like 5 or 6 years back, and now I'm reading it again with these new hardcovers that came out.
So
they're worth it.
If you've read Swamp Thing and you want to get in the discussion, go to iFanboy.com. There's a whole post about this video. You can share what your thoughts are about the return to the DCU, or not.
You can send us an email at contact@fanboy.com or call our voicemail line 888-FANBOYS 326-2697.
Or you can follow us at twitter.com/iFanboy.
Get the up-to-the-minute updates about Swamp Thing.
Yeah, Swamp Thing! Guys, Swamp, he moves very slow. And we should have done the whole style.
He's like the Ints.
We should have done the whole show in the style of Swamp Thing dialogue, where we talk after we say some things, and then just take your time.
Like Christopher Walken?
No.